Hello,
Hey,
hello.
hey, what's happening?
Good
Hey
to see you
guys.
guys again. Hey, everybody. Welcome, everybody, to another Stream Team live beekeeping chat tonight. We're excited to have you here, and it's that time of the year when things are really ramping up in the beekeeping world. It seems like it's kind of that way, at least down here, much of the year, but now we're really getting crazy. I think pretty much across the country that things are happening. I know you guys are having some cold weather up north. My goodness, it's May, but you know, it's been real nice down here. We're at about, I think, 70, uh, 70s today, so it's nice and sunny. We've had some kind of strange weather, but today is
Wow,
pretty normal spring day down here. So,
wow.
of course, I was in the hospital working all day, so that was just wonderful. But anyway,
Yeah, wow.
so why don't we kind of introduce everyone a little bit? If you haven't been on here before, we appreciate you coming in, and I see folks putting where they're from as they come in. If you haven't dropped your location, let us know where you're from. I always think it's super neat to see people literally from all over the world sometimes that check into my videos. And even here on the stream team, we have people sometimes from other countries and all over this, North America, the United States that check in. So it's so much fun to see that, and everybody can see where you're from. And we just appreciate everyone coming in into the live chat tonight and spending a couple hours with us here. So a couple of things real quick. We do have super chats enabled and super stickers. If you feel like that's something you can do, it really helps us forward what we're trying to do as a stream team and as individual creators in our operations. So we appreciate anything you might be willing to give. And so enough of the introductions here. Why don't we start off with you, Greg? Tell us what's going on in your neck of the woods.
Well, we had a nice warm stretch there for a little while, and then it kind of turned cold, which kind of got things slowing down a little bit. And so there's it's that's the challenge when you try to get going in the spring is you're at the pace of Mother Nature, and it's just one of those things you have to learn to work through. And so that's what we're doing right now is making sure that we've got a good stirrup on top of everything, and then most important, a pollen patty. This is the time of year where they really start to want to brood up, especially when the floral sources start to flirt and really start to show up in the landscape. The bees go into brood mode, and what's challenging about that is if you're looking at your colonies as a unit, as an asset, once they start to do that and start to brood, when we get like these snaps where we've got 5 to 7 days a row of rain, and then when it's in the 40s, it really hits the brakes on that. But what we found is once they start bringing in natural pollen, um, when we play to that and just look to what they're doing, when we slap on those pollen patties on top, it really helps during these little when they those little hit the brake moments where they can just keep cruising, and then we don't take any steps back. So for us right now, the name of the game is make sure we have feed on all the splits, make sure we have pollen patties on all the splits, and then just kind of keep watching their growth. So right now we just got back and had our last package run of the season. So big shout out and thank you for all of our folks all across the state and all the folks who picked up here at the farm in Hopewell. We really appreciate you guys. That we had a tremendous time doing that. And even we're honored to have Ruth and Ricky Rorick from Horizontal Bees came up to visit to say hi to our folks and also hand deliver some of the very first lighthouse horizontal hives. So that was really cool to have them up. Of course, our buddy Brian was there on site too. And we had a couple other listeners that are some regulars on here. Mac Apiary Bees, he was up, Tom was up, and got a brand new custom horizontal from Ricky at Horizontal Bees. So it was a lot of fun, just fellowshipping and just having great conversation and hanging out with a lot of beekeepers. It was a tremendous weekend, and we're gearing up to do it all over again this coming weekend. The learning yard at Nature's Image Farm really kicks off again May the 6th. So we're gonna have a lot of fun. It's that time. It's just full speed ahead. Brian, how's things going on in your neck of the woods?
You're on, you're on mute, Brian.
Brian's done this before, hasn't he, Bruce?
You know,
Not very often. Not very often. He's usually on top of it there.
just horrible. It's horrible. I got too much going on in the background here, you know, red lights and everything. So I'm all
Yeah.
distracted. But, you know, everything, I guess, you know, like Greg said, I mean, we got even a little colder. You know, yesterday they said was for May 2nd, for a high, it was the coldest recorded temperature. So, I mean, I don't even know whether we broke 40 degrees yesterday. Today we were in the 40s, rainy. So, you know, it's been kind of in a holding pattern since I was able to do the splits, get the queens installed. We've been in that holding pattern. You know, I do have, like Greg said, I do have some feed on some of the colonies. You know, they probably need more. I haven't been able to go over and check those. So, you know, I've been slacking on that, but our temp should be warming here in a little bit, and I expect everything to just get really, really busy. You know, with our temps, we had such a warm, what was it, February in that, where we were so warm, and March was starting out warm, and you're thinking, gosh, the season's just going to be insane this year. And then, you know, Mother Nature kind of put a halt on things, and things are ramping back up. And now we got, you know, another system that came through and kind of put a halt on things. So, you know, I think after this, Greg, I think you might have heard, they called it like some Omega cold front or something. I've never heard of that before.
The names they come up with for
They
these things,
have a
I don't
name
know.
for everything, but yeah, they said it
know
was
what
like
it
an Omega cold front, and I was like, wow, you know, should I be looking outside to make sure I'm okay?
Quick, run to
You
the
know,
store, grab all the milk
yeah.
and bread you can. The Omega cold front's coming through.
Not milk and water. You got to buy all the TP.
As I say, don't forget the toilet
right.
paper.
Yeah, buy up the TP. But yeah, we'll be getting some warm temps. So I plan on you know, just getting out and just assessing each of the colonies, seeing where they're at. When I was down at Greg's, I picked up a couple more, you know, buckets. I bought some nice lids from him that had the pre-drilled holes for bucket feeders. But me being, you know, just super knowledgeable and on top of everything, I didn't buy buckets. So
You mean
I had,
plugs? You didn't buy the
yeah,
plugs?
well, no, I didn't even have the bucket feeders to put on top.
Okay.
So
Wait, this time or the last time?
Oh, you bought the lids and you didn't have the buckets. I see what you're saying.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And that was the last time I was down. Like I had a whole list and I need this and that and all this kind of stuff. And I walk away, and then when I'm putting the lids on, I'm like, I have no buckets, you know. Now, thankfully, I did have the plugs because Greg 2 years ago, when I got packages from him, he said, "Hey, take a bucket, try it," and he gave me, I think you probably handed me about, oh gosh, 10 plugs because you probably knew that I'd mess up a couple of them. So I still had extras, so I was able to at least get plugs in them. But I'm gonna.
Are you telling me it was so busy? I didn't even see your haul. Are you telling me you left the farm shop again without buckets?
No, I got buckets this time. Yeah,
Oh, you
I
got your
did.
buckets this time.
I got.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay, good.
I got 5 or 6 buckets. So, you know, I do have like some of those top feeders that I like to use.
Uh-huh.
But all of my other colonies that I don't have the top feeders, and like the Apiaries
Right.
have their feeders,
Mm-hmm.
every single one of those now will have the nice lids on them with bucket feeders. So, you know, I'll be
Did you pick
set.
up
I
some of our
mean,
new lids?
I saw them and I didn't.
Oh.
So, Bruce, you'll know that I kind of pulled a slick move there, is because I saw sitting right over by the register, there's this box that had these little bugs crawling around, you know, that had dots on them.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
I ducked
Oh.
out before somebody was able to say, "Here, Brian, take one of these."
Oh, you didn't want to grow more right now.
So
Yeah.
he was busy talking to Ricky and was going to go out
If-
and pick some for Ricky, and I ducked out the side door.
If I would have been there, it would have been tempting for that box to walk away. But of course, I wouldn't have done that. But anyway,
Yeah.
Good stuff, guys. Brian, you also have some new additions to the household there, don't you?
Oh man,
Some little tiny little additions.
yeah. There's 1 and 2 day old quail chicks
How
right
big
over
are they?
there.
Are they just like an inch and how tiny are they? Like an inch and
I,
a half big?
I bet they'd fit
Aren't
in
they
a
so
nice
little?
hot mustard dipping sauce packet from McDonald's, wouldn't they? They're about that
they
size.
would not even make a chicken nugget. That's
Yeah,
how.
they're
I'll
tiny,
grab one.
tiny. Yeah, why don't you
You
show us
guys,
one of those little
Let's
critters?
see it.
So Brian's been telling us about these quail eggs that he bought, and he's got they hatched out, and so he's been sending pictures of them as they emerge, and they look a lot bigger in the picture than they probably do in real life. Oh, so cute,
Oh,
man.
look how cute and
Golly.
delicious.
yeah.
Wow.
Wow, so awesome.
I mean,
So sweet.
small.
They look a little better once they get all fluffy and furry than they do right when they emerge,
Yeah,
don't they, from the eggs?
yeah.
All right, guys. Well, down here in Southeast Alabama, it's been busy. You know, we've kind of gone through a little bit of what you guys are going through now. We had some warm days like in January, February. Then we've had some cold days, a lot of rain. It's just been a crazy spring, and it seems like I say that every year, though. Every year is just a little bit different, but every year is a little bit crazy, I think, in springtime here in the South, and it probably is a little bit that way everywhere. But as far as the bees go, the bees came back from pollination. They were not as strong as I had hoped. I did lose a few. Rough year in California. I'm debating even going back. Right now, I'm thinking probably not, at least not this coming year, just to kind of let the bees stay here and be able to manage and take care of them and maybe take a different approach. I don't know if I'm going to do that or not, but let's see, about a week and a half ago or almost 2 weeks ago now, I went in and recruited Justin, a young man here that helps me out sometimes with the bees, and we went through all of them, and we basically determined which ones were going to make it. We had some that were, if they weren't dead out, so they're close to it, so we kind of shook the bees out. Most of them were pretty strong, but not a lot of brood. There's a little brood in there, and they looked pretty good. We had quite a few that were strong, a few that were pretty mediocre, and there wasn't a lot of brood, and especially the mediocre ones. And so we made some assessments. The temperatures were perfect. We applied Formic Pro to the strong ones, and the medium or weak ones, I just shot them with oxalic acid. Like I say, it's not going to hurt anything. There wasn't a lot of brood, so maybe that knocked down any mite load. I was a little bit surprised the mite load wasn't horrible. Everyone we tested did have some mites. We did quite a few tests, and I think we only have one that was above threshold, honestly, which was, when I say threshold, I mean 9 mites. But I think there were, 12 or something in that, or maybe 15. But the rest of them were like 2 and 3, in the mite washes. So I was surprised by that. But we went ahead and treated them, and I'm going to be interested to see this weekend how they look when I'm going to actually pull the Formic Pro and stack supers this weekend. We got a flow coming in right now. It's just starting, and I think we're going to have a very intense flow now for the next, hopefully, 3 to 4 weeks of the tallow. Privet's been very mediocre, and so we'll see what happens. But I've gone around to my different yards this past weekend. My job, on last Tuesday, I'd ordered a few virgin queens from Corey Stevens, the VSH, and I put them in the Nukes, the split side made. Went back on Friday and took the tape off at the end of those little cages for the bees to chew themselves out. And hopefully right now they're in the process of getting mated, and looked pretty good. Everything looked pretty good up there. Went around and checked most of my bee yards and stacked the supers up on the ones I thought needed it. And so I've been through pretty much all my bees for the most part over the last few days. And then we'll check the pollination bees and the bees at the farm this coming weekend and make sure that that they are, hopefully appropriately cared for and the supers are stacked, because we're about to hit hopefully a good sized honey flow. We need it. So that's where we're at. It's just been busy trying to manage, manipulate, and make sure we stay ahead of the bees a little bit. And overall, the bees are looking pretty good. There are a few, there's always a few that don't look very good. And my backyard, I went through them the other day, and there was one of those that looking at it from the entrance, they look healthy, but I opened it up and it was mostly a drone layer in there. So I don't know if they superseded the queen and she didn't get mated or what's going on, but I'm going to have to get that rectified. I didn't have time that day, but I'll probably go grab a strong colony from somewhere else and bring it in and put it here in my backyard, because it's kind of strange here in town, here in Dothan, Alabama, and Southeast Alabama, where I live, is probably my best bee yard. I wish I could put 50 hives right here, but I can't because I'm on a 3rd-acre lot. Greg's been here and he knows I got houses everywhere all around me. So, you know, I've got 6 or 7 colonies back there now. That's about the most that I need to have. That's borderline too many, but the neighbors are okay with it, so it works out good. So that's kind of what's going on down here, and I'm just hoping we get a good honey flow. I'm hoping those pollination bees bounce back with a vengeance, and we have some good strong colonies there, and then we'll see how things move, rock and roll moving forward. And Greg, you and I have talked a fair amount about the pollination situation, and in a sense, I'm a little bit relieved if I don't go out there. I think then I can have more control and manage my bees better, and maybe be able to work towards some different goals than trying to build those jokers up in December and January when they really don't want to. You know, you're trying to artificially stimulate them, and it's possible, but it's a lot of work to do something that, you know, I really don't want to do at that time of the year. So we'll see what happens moving forward. But for right now, we just got to hope they're prepared for honey and they make some honey and we can keep them healthy, and then we'll hit the dirt and just move on with our annual
Bruce,
jobs.
How much money a week do you spend on lottery tickets?
None.
Do you feel like pollination bees are sometimes like buying scratch offs?
Well, I've never had a bad experience until this year, and this year was awful. So this year I would say, yes, it was 4 out of 5 years is not bad. Hey, I appreciate the super chat, super stickers, everybody. Brian, Greg, Matt, and David. Thank you guys for doing that. Just wanted to give you a shout out before they drop off of here, and it's highly appreciated. But yeah, I think it can be, Greg. It's always risky. You know, whenever the bees are out of your control anywhere, it's a risk, you know, especially when you're putting them in a situation where, first of all, they're out of your control. And second of all, you know, there are a lot of other bees around. It can be a risk. And so, but it's worked out really good for us. Frankly, this is the first year we've had really any issues, but it is a lot of work. And my thoughts are, if I could break that many nukes out and sell them next year, good, healthy, strong bees, I would actually make more, you know, from the nukes, and I'd have control of everything and be able to manage the bees the way I want to manage them, instead of sending them out there. And, you know, the pollination contracts pay more than what a nuke, a little more than what a nuke could make. But when you pay all the fees and all the trucking and all the everything that goes into it, by the time you get them back, you know, you wouldn't even make as much as you can make for some good, strong nukes. And so I'm kind of warming up the idea of just keeping them home.
You know, the one thing that just kind of popped into my head was beekeepers, at least most of the ones that I know, you like to know what's going on with your bees. And everybody somewhat has their own strategy, some of them very unique in how they manage their apiary. And myself, I don't think I would be comfortable, you know, getting everything set up and perfect and then handing them over to somebody. That's
it's tough. Now, I will tell you this, you know, Jose's on here. He just hopped on from the California Beekeeper. And it's interesting because he knows the farmers. He knows exactly where our bees were, basically. He's worked with these guys before, and it's up there where in the same town, in the same area where some of his bees are. So I don't think he was actually able to go. And he said, unless it's me, I'm a great broker, which is true, Jose. We'd love to.
Yeah.
We know they'd be in good hands with you, but basically, you know, he kind of helped walk us through and talk us off a cliff a couple of times with our bees. You know, when we were he actually talked to my friend Davis a few times, because Davis is the guy that had the most skin in the game. He kind of arranged everything with the broker and arranged the truck, and just kind of, you know, he had a lot more skin in the game. I think he had around 200 plus colonies on that truck, which is a much bigger risk or investment than what I had on there. I had 52. And so, you know, he had geared his whole year around that. And with me, it's just something else I do, and it's a nice bonus, you know, a shot in the arm, but it's not what my main emphasis is. And so, Jose has been real good to us to help us, you know, work through this thing a little bit and so forth. And so we appreciate you, Jose, for doing that, and for being, you know, kind of our person on the ground out there to kind of keep us posted on what's going on, because we weren't sure if what we were getting was true. We weren't sure about kind of how things were really going out there, but Jose was right there in that environment. He could kind of help us It was a horrible year weather-wise, lots of cold weather, lots of rain, and it was just a tough year out there, especially Northern California. I'm not sure how the Central Valley was, but where our bees were, it was a tough year. But they made it back, and they're here, and we'll see if they bounce back. I think they will. They actually looked way better than I thought they were going to look. So, but Greg, you mentioned something. Both of you guys have mentioned a little bit tonight, and I think it's a kind of a good way, maybe a good direction to go with this chat tonight, as far as dealing with opposition in the weather. I know particularly in the late winter, spring, winter is kind of a weird thing, because the winter time, especially up there, you guys are cold. You really just can't do much with the bees during, for 2 or 3 months, at least up there, 3 or 4 months, if I'm not mistaken. But when that springtime hits, just kind of managing, and a lot of people are going through this right now throughout the country and throughout the world right now. Spring is upon them. And just kind of managing those cold snaps, the rainy spells, splits, and things like that in the spring. A lot of people really are just itching. They really want to get the splits made and get started and getting the bees and just start growing fast in the spring. I'm guilty of that. I did that this year. I made some early splits. So last year it paid off. This year it didn't pay off quite as good for me overall. But Greg, and maybe both of you guys, but especially Greg, since you're, kind of doing the commercial thing, do you have any words of wisdom for folks coming out of spring that you might want to share with us, as far as kind of how to manage, what to look for, and kind of what you do to prepare yourself for these weird spring weather situations?
I would say for me, it's, 2 is 1, 1 is none, 3's for me. Like to have some backup plans and some contingency plans in place in case things do go sideways, because they absolutely will, especially if you're planning, if your bee growth if you're leaning on that for an income. If it is your business, you got to be able to pivot. You got to be able to improvise and keep things moving in that positive direction. Or if they're just going so far south, you have to know when to cut and run on certain things. This year, we've been saying it, and I feel like a broken record. I say it every single time we get on here, but I felt like we got the warning spring was going to be fast and furious early on, and so we planned accordingly. We had our most of our equipment, or our frames, our woodenware lined up. We had our feed lined up. More importantly, we had our pollen patties lined up, and we're here ready to go for when it was the appropriate time. When those maples started exploding in February, the bees weren't waiting around for everyone on YouTube or Facebook to say, okay, it's officially springtime, beekeepers. Now it's appropriate for you to crack your lids and start working your bees. The bees didn't get that memo, and they started doing what bees do as soon as there was an opportunity to do it. Bees are one of the greatest opportunists you'll ever see. So where I think the advantage that I think that you have when you work close with nature is you can look to the bees, you can look to the trees, you can look to the ground, and you can see what's going on. And you can then start to make moves. So for us, seeing that the bees were looking for protein, knowing that they needed those carbohydrates, for us, it was a matter of feed. We had to put the feed on the ones that needed it, and then start flirting with pollen and to see, would they actually take it? Do they need it? Do they want it? And when the very first part of the year, we were putting dry pollen sub out just to see if the bees would take it. They started just devouring it. And so we transitioned from that to putting our Hive Alive patties on, and they started devouring those too. What we noticed is just putting the patties on in and of itself did not cause bees to brood prematurely. What it did is it kind of replenished any kind of reserve. It started to kind of build them up for when those early nectar sources did start to come. When the purple dead nettle and everything started to pop, that we started seeing wet nectar in all the frames. And once we started seeing that incoming source of nectar, there was just enough incoming pollen as well that the bees did wake up, especially these Caucasians. They started to, the light switch got turned on. They started boom, 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 boom. It's been a steady grow from there. But I feel like if we weren't on top of it, if we didn't have that early pollen sub on, if we didn't have the syrup on early in the year, just in case, I feel like there would be probably 7 to 10 days at a minimum where there would be a lack of production, probably more than that by now, because this past week alone, we've had probably 5 days where they just got absolutely shut down, coming off of about a 10 to a 14-day stint where it was just beekeeping heaven. It was 60s and 70s, and the birds were chirping, and the sun was shining, and the flowers were vibrant and beautiful. And it was just, you walk out into the yards, and all the entrances are just clouds of bees glistening in the sun. And you're just thinking, man, this is awesome. And you start to get excited. You start to get ahead of yourself. You start to, okay, get all the stuff staged, all the things ready. And then the weather hits. You're thinking, oh, man, now what? You know, when it does get that cold, it's not so much that the cold stops them from being bees, but the cold, when we were getting 28 and 30 degrees at the same time that we had a lot of flowers in bloom, that shuts the flowers nearly right off. And then when you couple that with a lot of rain several days in a row, it started to wash the pollen and the nectar out, and it got cold. Then it was almost a no man's land. For about 5 days here, the only thing there's flowers on, but I don't know that there's much nectar coming off right now. And that is right now the big plant carrying anything through all of this right now seems to be the Russian olive. The autumn olive is on, but it's been raining constantly. And so even when it stops raining, you go out to the autumn olives, there's no bees on them at all. So I'm hoping the next couple of days, the rain that we did have, hopefully by the time it saturates the ground, saturates the roots, and then the hedges and the bushes and the plants start to pull that up, and with sunshine and photosynthesis start to actually pump and push that nectar back up to the top. Hopefully, the bees will kind of get caught up. But it's one of those things where if we were just relying on what was going on outside for protein and carbohydrates, I really do feel like we would be behind the 8 ball here just a little bit. So just looking to see what the bees are doing, what nature is showing, the cards that she's playing, knowing what that looks like, lets us put a plan together. And for us, that's been supplemental feeding, making sure we've got those things on there. And then as soon as like tomorrow, it's going to be 60 some degrees, the next day 70s. It is going to be swarm city in this part of the state again, because those bees were growing and they were building and they were building and they were building, and they get 5, 6, 7 days inside of their box with just rain. Watch out. It's going to be, there are going to be swarms all over the place. So tomorrow, that's what we're doing, is going through, cracking lids, making sure everyone's got enough room. If we need to go and add supers, add a second brood box, grafting, you name it. It's I think that was the last little really cold dip, and then now it's just hopefully it'll just be kind of full on from here. But that's kind of our plan is to just look to the bees, look to the trees, and then make sure we're aware of what the bees are doing and why. So if we need to come in and supplement things just to keep things moving along at a steady pace, then we have time to step in and make that plan.
Sounds great, man. Brian, what about you, man? What are your thoughts as far as management in the spring with the weird weather?
I tell you, it definitely presents a little bit of a challenge, just because you always, and to step back, you have to be very proactive, and you can't be that reactive person. If you're reactive, well, then you're out on the ladder with a bucket and you're catching your bees when they're in the trees. For me, this is what I've tried to do. And last year, I was somewhat successful in my spring management. I think I only had 2 colonies last year swarm, and I was fine with that. But I tried to stay ahead of them in that when they were growing, I would split them and move the queen off to a new hive. So she, almost thinks, hey, I swarmed and I'm in a new home. And I put in my mated queens into, that original colony. It somewhat worked for me. And that's where I'm at this year. Like, I'm right in the middle of that right now. Is I've split my colonies. Hopefully they don't end up in the trees. The 2 colonies I do have at the farmer's property, I did not split. And I've already told him, expect probably both of them to swarm, and last year he was calling me, he's like, kid, we got there's a big ball of them bees are hanging up in my one tree, and I went over and I got them, and I think I collected 3 swarms last year over there. This year I told him, I said, I'm not really concerned with them. I'm going to try, and if we get decent enough weather, I'm going to try and check them and stack them up. I'd prefer not to lose a bunch of bees into the trees, but for those, I'm just kind of managing a little bit different, just because could I have split those colonies? Yes. They're very large colonies, so I probably could have pulled 2 splits off of each one. But like I said before, I get into that problem where I don't have a truck to haul equipment out from, where my mom's property is out to the farmer's property. So that's my limiting factor right there. So that kind of dictates what I do with those colonies there. So I'm just kind of, for me, it's almost like a curiosity thing. If I just throw some supers on them, how well can I manage them to keep the bees out of the trees? So for those 2, it'll be interesting. But the others, I'm just in the midst of, they've been split. Hopefully I was on top of them. But, we'll see. So, in the feed also, like Greg said, man, I've gone through, oh my gosh, even with the number of colonies that I have, I've gone through what, 2, 3, I think probably 3 buckets, 5-gallon buckets already of syrup. So it's been insane, the amount of syrup. I mean, you put it on them and they devour it. And like what Greg said, and this is one thing that goes back to one of the talks, and it was Ian was on with Humberto, and they were talking about the different supplements for your bees. And one of the things that Ian said, and this is exactly what Greg said, is if you put those patties on your colonies, right now is a prime time where they're out and foraging, because we were in, like Greg said, we were in just a beekeeper's paradise with how the weather was. I mean, there was just so much out there for them. And then you get shut down, and there's days after days after days where they can't exit their hive. So what's that colony to do? Now, if you have those patties on them and you have a syrup on them, they're going to keep at it. So, I've kind of slacked in the last few days. I haven't been able to go check them, just, things around home, but I think they're okay. That's more or less my plan, is just to try and stay on top of, my splits, and stay on top of the feed. And it's work in the spring. It's definitely work in the spring. And, I'm looking forward to almost getting over that hump and, just kind of get them into that, they're just in a cruise control pattern where they're just bringing in the nectar and hitting everything. And I'm stacking up supers, and, it'll be curious this year to see, as far as like my honey harvest, what happens. So, be interesting. Time will tell. We'll know in about another month or so here, how things look.
That's good stuff. And it sounds like, my opinion is I don't feed a lot in the spring. If I was really just trying to build them up really fast, I would. But down here, to me, it seems like as long as they're come out of winter pretty heavy, they just kind of seem to do okay. And even if they get a little bit light, we're always not too far away from a little flow coming in. And I was getting a little bit worried the last couple of weeks, but this past weekend when I went through them, it's really the strangest thing, because like down in Slocum, I went through those bees. That's down where Big Red is, the queen. I messed up with the marker, and she's healthy, by the way. I'm going to do a little video here soon. And
Nice.
went back through and checked on the 4-way split I did. And, some of the colonies down there, it's like they're growing and they're just putting a little bit in, and it's like they're utilizing all the resources to grow. And there were a couple of colonies down there. I didn't actually shoot a video of this, but they are like packed with the white wax, and the honey's coming in. So there is stuff blooming. I think there's a privet flow a little bit. The towel is starting to kick in a little bit. But, I think what's happening is the reason I'm not seeing consistent honey in the hives is because I really didn't feed them much, if much at all this spring. And so I think they are utilizing whatever's coming in to build back up and to get their strength built up before they start sucking the honey in there. So I think that's probably what's going on. And that is probably my biggest weakness with my bees is the feeding. I do feed. I'm kind of a minimalist on that. It's just a lot of it's just a financial thing for me. And they usually just blow it out about, and when the honey flow starts, they just kick it in gear and make a lot of honey. I know I could probably make more, but it also becomes an issue with swarming. If I get them built up too strong, then I'm worried they're going to swarm like crazy because I can't get to them as often as I probably need to really control that. And so, Greg, I like what you said about peeking in on them and, looking at the bees, looking at the trees, and then assessing for swarms and splits and everything. I love the fact that you can do that. You're able to do that. And that's really, I think, what you have to do if you're feeding them a lot is you just got to be in there checking on them fairly frequently to try and, manage those situations that arise. And so somebody on here said something like they look at swarms, they call them natural splits. And that is somewhat true.
Self-splitting hives.
Yeah, that is exactly what it is, honestly. And so, I honestly don't have any idea how many of my hives swarm out in the out yards. In my backyard, I see them. I look up in the trees, and when I come home, and I can see them. But I rarely, every once in a while, I encounter a swarm out there, but rarely do I do that. But I'm sometimes out of those colonies for 10 days to 2 weeks at a time, sometimes longer. And so who knows how many swarms actually occurred. And but what I found over the years, for the most part, it seems like they replace those queens. They use those queen cells, and as long as they don't swarm out, it seems like they barely skip a beat. And so I just get behind with everything I'm trying to do a little bit, but it works out for me. And so I totally encourage people to feed and stay on top of it like what you guys are doing. But I feel like I'm hanging on for the skin of my teeth and just trying to get honey boxes stacked on right now. Hopefully fast enough to maximize the flow.
Yeah.
Well, Bruce, that's an important thing you mentioned there, because how the three of us individually are our plan of attack for the goals for our operations are a little different too. And so what we're looking at, what we're trying to achieve, and then the timelines we're trying to achieve them in are going to be, a little bit different. I think in my scenario, when we're splitting everything down and dropping cells, it's an intensively managed operation at this point of the year. And what's interesting about that is you're able to see loss and gains very quick. And so you have to be on top to adjust and to keep things moving forward. So when we talk about feeding and making sure we've got supplementals on there, we're seeing it's a macro shot of what is going on in the larger colonies. It's just in a very, very small but close up look. And so that also helps us kind of tune in to the larger colonies too, to kind of see what's going on. But that's, as we talk about all these things, right now we are in our yard right now, we've got pretty much all the out yards brought into the farm, and it's a combination of colonies that have split out, that we've dropped cells. It's colonies that we're building up as drone factories to then spread out all across the yards for drone mating, and then it's colonies that we're specifically overwintered in, like 5 or 8 frame medium boxes that we use in those yards for queen rearing. So everything has a specific purpose and chore to it. But when you start splitting all your colonies early in the year, you can really see what they need, what they have, and then it's a little bit you can start to steer that direction a little bit. But it's definitely a little different for all of us, especially different times of the year. But I've never seen the bees look this good, which is scary this early. Because if the bees are looking this good, if the host looks this good this early, you can better believe the parasites are going to be equally impressed, and we're going to have some mites to keep an eye on too. If the bees are growing this well, the mites going to have a
just think, and talking about all the parasites with this. Now we're in our last little cold spell, and just thinking about another month, what the counts will be like.
Yeah, I've really been, and I haven't tested. I really worked hard on the mites last fall, all through the winter,
Mhm.
and I haven't tested some of my out yards really in a little while. But I do know that the ones that came back from California were surprisingly low on mites. It could very well be that there wasn't a lot of brood, and so maybe that brood break had
Mhm.
something to do with that, because I think they were honestly so stressed out there the last few weeks that
Mhm.
they couldn't. I think they just kind of shut down a lot of them, and so
Mhm.
that could very well be what it was. But that is a very important thing to consider. In the past, when the honey flow started, I've just kind of grabbed a hold and hope the bees survive the honey flow, and then I can just start treating for mites like crazy after that in the summertime. But this year I tried to take somewhat of a different approach and kind of really jump on them last fall and throughout the winter to hopefully go into the spring with a low mite load. And so hopefully they
Mhm.
won't peak as much. They're going to peak some, they're going to go up some. I think it happens, but if I can get them down as close to zero as possible in the wintertime and early spring, then hopefully, we can manage them once the honey comes off again a little
Mhm.
better. And the Formic Pro thing has opened up an entirely new opportunity for me as far as this goes. If it works, that's something you can use with honey supers on if you need to, and it
Mhm.
penetrates the cappings. And as long as the temperatures are appropriate. Right now the temperatures have been, I don't know if we've had any days over 85 degrees, maybe just a couple here, which is unusual. Normally it's starting to get a little warmer by now. But we've had several days in the low 80s, but most of our days have been 70s, 70s, 80s, low 80s, and then 60s even some of the days lately. And so it's been perfect conditions for that. And so we're going to see. I'm going to find out. And those bees, coming back from pollination, obviously were stressed, and they were still a little bit, maybe, hopefully they weren't stressed too bad when we put it on there, but I needed to go ahead and get them treated because I want to start stacking those honey supers. And
Mhm.
it was a big experiment for me to do that, because those colonies out there at the pollination location last year made the most honey for me of all my hives. And so
Hmm.
hopefully we'll get some this year out there as well. But we're about to find out, because this Friday is when I'm going to assess and stack and see what happens.
Mhm.
But it's just this time of the year it's kind of interesting, because like we're all going through the same thing as far as spring and the excitement of spring, but we're all at different times. The timing is different
Yeah.
for everybody throughout the country and throughout the northern hemisphere. It's all the way around the globe. It's like this. And then the southern hemisphere, they're gearing up for their winter. So it's just kind of interesting to see
Right.
how different it is. The principles apply everywhere, but it's just a little bit different for each person. And I think we've had very similar stuff to what's going on up there for you guys. It's just was a little bit earlier in the year, and so that's just what you'd expect with us here in the South. Great conversation, guys. It's fun. We've got, let's see, 160 people on here. Appreciate everyone for coming on tonight. That's great. And we've had some people checking in and checking out, and we just appreciate everyone coming in and hanging out with us as long as you can. It's been a lot of fun. We've been doing this now for over a year, and it's been just a great time. Trying to think of anything else you guys might want to address. Is there any questions you guys might have out there as far as uh, hive management or beekeeping? If you put it in all caps so we can see it, we'll try to get to it. If we don't get to it, we apologize. But um, we'd love to answer questions, or at least give you our opinion if you have any questions for us. Let's see. I bought two new nukes and two new nukes, and one nuke it had almost no food. I also had a fist-sized cluster dead in the corner of one frame with heads and cells and a nice frame of brood that looked like
Mm.
it was chilled.
Mm.
So I guess you're saying here that these bees had died out. I'm assuming is what that means. Greg, what do you think happened there?
Well, I don't know where JC Apiary is, but to have a colony starve out inside of a nuke, my mind goes to how nukes are put together. And for something to starve out almost seems like it was a nuke, either A, quickly made with very little resources and then moved a pretty good distance, or the nuke was JC Apiary. Where are you located? If you're already buying nukes, you've got to be either down south, or you're up north and bought a southern nuke, or maybe you bought an overwintered nuke. It'd be strange to buy an overwintered nuke this late.
South Central
South
Michigan.
Central Michigan. Oh, good Lord. So you either bought an overwintered nukes, or you brought some southern spring nukes up. What I don't wonder happened is how long that they were on the road getting up to you. assuming that's what they were. If it was an overwintered nuke and they starved out, well, that could be a situation where, depending on the size of the cluster, how the nuke was made, if the nuke was pulled from a strong single somewhere, and it was done in a way to where it was nothing but maybe nurse bees and with no foragers, you might have had a queen in there, a lot of nurse bees, where however long they were at the point before you or when they got to you, there's not going to be any field force to replenish any of that feed. So whatever they have, they burn through. To have them have no food at all, though, that just seems like that might have been an error, or for them to burn through. Typically, if you're buying a good, healthy nuke, you're going to have 2 to 3 frames of brood is going to be in that box. There's going to be there's going to be some food along with at the top of the bands of those frames. You might have an entire frame that is nothing but a resource frame that's got pollen. It might have some, hopefully very little open nectar, but mostly capped honey. And then you're going to have a frame that they're drawing out and working on. There should have been plenty of honey in that nuke as it was transported to you. So if there's none, might have just been an accident on how the nuke was put together. Maybe it was held in a yard too long before it came up to you. It depends if the nukes were raised in that 5-frame configuration, or if they were just transferred to a 5-frame box and then to you. So many things going on there. But if you're in north central Michigan, and you only have, hopefully that second nuke that's struggling has some bees left, best thing you can do for something that small is you got to get some feed to them. And if you're in north central Michigan, just spoke with a fella yesterday who had drove down from Detroit, and the weather up that way is worse than here. So it's cold, it's wet, it's rainy.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to improve, but not by a whole lot this coming week. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know how much foraging opportunities those bees are going to have over the next week or so. But what I would do is just try to get them the carbohydrates and some protein, meaning get them a little bit of a pollen patty.
Mm-hmm.
Try to get them maybe I would probably go for a thick syrup right now. I don't know that I would even put a thin syrup, depending on what configuration you have them in. If they're in a nuke, are they still in a nuke box? Are they in a 10-frame single now? It kind of dictates how you go about feeding them. But a lot of things can happen. Nukes are made. There's unfortunately a variety of different ways. And a lot of times, if you're in that part of Michigan and you just bought a nuke, my thought goes to it was a nuke that was probably brought up. If it was an overwintered nuke, it should have definitely been a little bit different of a situation than that. So I could go all night on the ins and outs, but those are my thoughts. Brian, what about you?
I don't know whether, man, that this will get me. This will almost see. I don't want to get on one of my similar Greg Burns get up, get going. But from my experiences, I would not buy a nuke anymore. I try and not purchase any bees, not unless I know the person personally. I had a situation almost like that before, where I purchased a nuke from somebody in Ohio. I did not know them, found them through the facial book. And that colony, they failed after 2 to 3 months. I was actually pulling frames of brood out of my colonies that I had when I picked the thing up. I didn't know any better to check it. And that's the one thing I would say too, is when you got it, were you able to check it? Because if I was buying a nuke and I saw that it was, had dead bees and, that situation, I wouldn't take it. But when I went and got that nuke that the only one that I got from somebody I didn't know, I, was looking at it and oh, you don't want to bother it. They're sealed up. You don't want to do this and that and whatever. And I took the guy's word because he was a commercial beekeeper guy. I thought, I'm going to trust this guy. When I got home and I looked at the number of bees that were in it, I actually pulled a frame of brood out of one of my colonies that I had in my yard and put in that just to try and boost it.
Oh man.
and it's like, you shouldn't have to do that. When you get a nuke, that thing should be, you should have a sufficient amount of bees in it that, I mean, really the thing is going, like you said, you've got multiple frames of brood, you have a frame of stores in there, and they're ready to roll. But that would be my, question would be, were you able to check it? And, I mean, if it's in that bad a shape, whoever you got it from, I mean, what do they have to say?
Yeah.
That's the other thing that I would ask also is, what do they say about it? Because if I sold, and I'm kind of fast forwarding into next year, what I'm will probably try and do next year is sell some nukes, just to keep my numbers where they're at right now. Me personally, if I sell somebody bees and they get bees, if they get a nuke and it's like that, me personally, I would feel horrible.
Yeah.
So
Well, you would want to know. So if you ever have
exactly.
any issues with anything from anybody, before you decide to go on and spout off on the what do you call it, Brian? The spatial media, or what's your name for it?
Facial book.
Facial book.
Or the
Before you
interweb.
go, spouting off, looking for answers, or to talk trash, the first point of contact should be the person you bought it from and say, hey, what am I looking at? What's going on? What do we do from
Yeah.
here? Because 9 times out of 10, it was an accident. And these things happen all the time. It doesn't matter what the manufacturer is or what the product is. That's manufacturing of anything, and sometimes things do happen. And if you don't give that person the opportunity to make it right, not only are you doing them a disservice, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah.
No amount of squabbling is going to turn that box around. But if you give somebody the opportunity to make it right, I think that really does help. But in the case of the question here, to be in that part of Michigan with a nuke that's not looking so good, get a hold of whoever you bought it from and say, hey, because anything in the world's happened. I mean, there is, and so they're going to want to know, and they're going to want to make it right. And if they don't, and if they don't want to make it right, and if they won't make it right, okay, that's a different story.
I think that is very wise counsel, Greg, because sometimes it's easy to kind of get critical of folks, but give them a chance to make it right before you get critical. I would say too that there is a great video. This thing all started back a little over a year ago. We were kind of based around the Hive life philosophy. Cayman Reynolds put that thing together, and he put out a really good video just within the last week or two on Cayman Reynolds Tennessee Bees, or whatever his channel is called. I think you can look up Cayman Reynolds, KAMONS, KAMON Reynolds. And if you haven't subscribed to his channel, you should. But there's a really good video on what does a good nuke look like, and he basically goes through. He has a nuke in a gesture box. I think he's got it ready to sell, and he basically shows you like kind of what the brood should look like, how much food there should be in there. And it was really a good looking nuke. It was a good strength, but it wasn't too strong, but it had a lot of brood, and it was just ready to go into a 10 frame box and explode. And it had the resources to get by for a few days. And he even talked about how important it was to go ahead and sell that nuke and before it got too strong. He had it timed out just perfectly. And so if you want to know what a close to perfect nuke looks like, he does a great job just going through and explaining it. He pulls it apart and shows you exactly what the bees look like, how much brood, and kind of what to look for when you're purchasing nukes, and what to ask, the person who you're buying it from, what's it going to look like when I open that thing up? If, I think they said that in that particular nuke, they didn't open it up. They weren't able to. So to me, that's somewhat of a, I want to at least peek in on a couple of them and see what they look like before I purchase, something like that from somebody. I would want to look in there and see what they look like and get to know the person a little bit better. I would pretty much trust, like you, Greg, or Cayman, or even my mentor here that sold me nukes originally, people like that I know well and I trust. That's one thing. But someone like you, Greg, you probably I don't know if you take your clients out there. If I was there, you'd probably show me a couple of them and let me see what they looked like too. I think that's what I do when I if I don't sell a lot of nukes, I'm hope to sell more in the future, but I just go out there with them and we pick them out. I mean, you know, we don't, now I'm not trying to sell hundreds of nukes. Usually I sell 2 or 3 at a time, but I'll just have, you know, 6 or 8 nukes out there, and I say, okay, here's the ones I'm trying to sell. Let's go through them and let's just pick out a couple for you. But I have a little more time to do that. I know some people don't have the time to do that.
We used to do that. We used to literally bring your box and let's go through the yard, and we'll pick and pull every frame out of this box and put it into your box.
Yeah, you can't do that anymore.
That totally works up until a certain point.
Absolutely.
But now anymore, it's not even doable anymore, unless you just had to be effective and efficient. We have pickup dates and times and slots for folks to come, and we kind of notify them as we get a little bit closer, as we're watching the bees, and do that. You know, it doesn't matter if we're making the splits from the yard at the farm, or if it's another out yard. Typically, we want everything to be ready for pickup so they can grab their nuke and they can go. That's usually the best way that's done. But the thing about it is, every single nuke, I'm meticulously going through it. I'm going in and I'm making sure that it's a box. It's a box that I'm so proud of that I hardly even want to sell it, because I want it to stay there. So we're going through every single box like that and making sure everything is just beautiful. So there is definitely a fine line between showing the customer what the nuke is versus when you're doing it at the next scale up, having it to where you've already done all the work. Every box is beautiful. It gets to be a little bit tricky too, because I'm not sure how to say this. If you are questioning the integrity of who or what you're buying the nuke from, and you feel like you have to look, then I don't know that you know that beekeeper well enough yet. Now, I know there's a lot of situations where you just don't. You're never going to. Some people, wherever they're at in the country, they're buying nukes. Whoever has them, they have no idea who they are. They don't know what they're about. They don't know where the bees come from. They don't know what kind of bees they are. They don't know what's inside of the box. And I get that. That's totally going to happen. And we're, kind of in kind of a luxury position where folks know who we are. It's very easy to find out what we're about, see the bees, but it's we would like to take every single customer into every single hive as we pull that nuke.
You can't do it.
Can't do it anymore. It's just there's too many nukes going out here to try to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, Greg, if something happens, if someone gets a nuke that just doesn't work out, I'm sure you want to hear about it and figure out how to help them fix it or make it right if something happened on your end. And so, when you're selling hundreds, if not thousands of nukes, I mean, it's just something's going to happen every once in a while. But you got to just.
That's why whenever I see a post saying, and this is on the Ohio groups, saying, does anybody, have packages? Anybody have nukes? Anybody have mated queens? I type in the same words every time.
Nature's Image Farm, Greg Burns.
I do, but that's because I've been there and I've seen how, Greg manages his apiary. I've been to countless learning yards now, so I see how he wants his customers to succeed, and he says it over and over and over and over. I'm one of the worst bee salesmen because I want you to succeed and never come back. So somebody that takes those extra steps with their customers, those are the kind of people that I want to purchase my bees from, because they've put heart into it. That's why just me personally now, if I ever need anything, I only get it from certain select people. Just I want to eliminate that stress. It's so stressful when you're just starting out, and I don't know, whether JC, I don't know whether had a couple other colonies and was looking to expand, so got the nukes, but it's just so stressful, and you hope that all the stars are in alignment, and then to have a situation like that happen, it's just like, oh, it's so disheartening sometimes.
Yeah, it is. And you're selling livestock. And so,
Hmm.
it's just got to be careful. I've known people that have gotten burned, even here locally. Just a person just throws a nuke together and they buy it. It's full of mites, or it's full of just it's not a healthy colony, and they fizzle out. And they'll sell them for. I just That's why I'm so hesitant to sell nukes. I just want to make sure that A, it's going to be strong, and B, they're just going to be good bees all the way around. And so the few nukes I've sold over the years, I think, have done really well, because like Greg says, I kind of pick my strongest ones. I won't even let them look at the weak ones. And I did have a swarm a couple of years ago, a swarm that had fairly recently moved into a box, or I just caught the swarm. And it was super strong. It didn't have a lot of bees, but that queen was laying up perfect frames, frames of brood and everything. And the guy wanted that one, so I sold it to him because it was a beautiful looking little colony. I'm not sure how they did, but typically I'd like to sell nukes that come from queens that I've watched work, new queens, or queens that I feel comfortable that they'll be able to get into a full 10 frame box and maybe even make a little bit of honey that first year. I'll try to make sure that I give them good stuff, but I'm hoping here in the next couple of years, maybe I can get into some more nuke sales, especially if I don't do pollination, if I can feel more confident about growth and my product and kind of watch them closer. I think I'm getting there.
I probably, like I said, I probably will next year. I haven't said it in a video. I haven't said anywhere, and it's just three guys talking. There's no one else listening right now. So,
hey, I see Grayson checked in from Wildwood Honeybee Farm.
Oh, yeah.
Grayson interviewed me. We had a live on his channel, Wildwood Honeybee Farms, Monday night. Y'all, Grayson he's a 13-year-old kid, lives not far from me. He's about an hour north of me. And I just want to give Grayson some kudos. He got into this YouTube thing, and I have watched him every single video he does. It seems like he improves his game a little bit. He gives you better angles to see what he's doing. His bee knowledge is getting better. And he did a really good job. I mean, we had a great time and a fun interview, and he just did a really good job that night. So if you get a chance to go back and watch that video from Monday night that he did with me, and if not, just go check out his channel and maybe hit that subscribe button. He does a good job. I'm impressed with. We've got some youth out there, some young people that are really doing a good job with their YouTube channels and with their bees. Some kids that are really skilled and going to make a lot of waves in the future. You got Rainier bees up there, reindeer bees up in Maine. You got Natalie, of course. You got Seth Hill, 23-year-old, works for Bob Benny. I spent a day with him, and just some really cool young people that are out there doing some just incredible things. So go check out some of these channels. And man, it's kind of crazy. We're an hour into this thing, and we got almost 160 people watching, and it just blows me away how people come in here and do this.
Grayson is like fearless there too, I'll say about him, because when I was his age, I would have been dead before I sat and did some of the interviews that he has.
Oh yeah, he has no fear.
He's had I mean, some heavy hitters in the beekeeping realm. Sure. And it's just
Rainier's the same way. Rainier's the same way. They both are they both do a good job. And Rainier's, he's pretty polished, and Grayson, every time he does an interview, it gets a little better. He just his skill set is improving.
Yeah.
Hey, I had some questions here from earlier in the chat that I wanted to kind of go back and revisit here. Let me see if I can find them. This is one that I don't know if you guys have tried this. There's all kinds of ways to do splits, but when I was talking to Gus Mitchell, we talked about the flyback split method, and don't really want to describe the details of that because it's a little bit detailed. But I did one last year and it worked out okay. I've done some variations on it, but I haven't done a lot of those to really see exactly, how they work. The one I did worked out okay last year. It was successful. And so, yes, I have tried that. I don't know if you guys have tried that. Greg, I know you guys each have your own methods of splitting, and I do some different things as well. Speaking of mites here, this is a really good question, I think. David Kress says, speaking of mites, when should I do my first mite wash? Only installed new nukes 1 and 2 weeks ago. I have screen bottom boards with inserts in, no signs of mites dropping so far. What do you guys think about that? When should they start washing and checking for mites after they get some nukes?
I wonder what, he installed new nukes 1 to 2 weeks ago. I would venture to say he's got to be south of Nashville, or he maybe had some nukes brought up. I guess the reason I ask is how mature were the colonies that the nukes were made from? If it was an overwintered and they were just coming out, it might not be as high of a risk. If it's something that's been that's never seen winter and the mother colonies were just in full production, those would be the ones you'd want to just do a spot check, not to say that one is a problematic versus the other, but the one that's never seen a brood break or has never slowed down in the wintertime could be the one that might be the one to have a little bit more mites going on in the mother colony. Therefore, you might have some there out of that split, out of that nuke. When should you do it? If we back up just a little further, when shouldn't we do it? And that's all the folks who just picked up packages. While the packages are inspected and they're clean, anything in the world can happen by the time that they start foraging, visiting any surrounding colonies in the area, bringing any mites home, starting to brood up. Things happen, but on packages, we like to recommend folks treat them with oxalic acid a week after they install. On a nuke, ideally the nukes were just sparkling clean when you picked them up. But like I said, anything in the world's possible. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of bees in a nuke to do a wash. 300 bees is not going to set a nuke back at all. Matter of fact, you probably would never even know you took, as long as it's a respectable looking nuke. I wouldn't hesitate at all. Matter of fact, I think I would rather sacrifice 300 bees in a wash out of a nuke now, just to know that either A, we're getting zeros or maybe ones. But what if you start pulling 3, 4, and 5 or 6% right away? Mm-hmm. You're gonna have to take some different steps there. Maybe get a hold of your nuke grower and say, hey, this is what I'm finding. What's going on? What do you recommend? That would be a better course of action, I think. But if you're not having any mites drop off so far, he's got inserts in his screen bottom boards. If you don't have the sticky boards or anything showing mites, I mean, there's probably not a lot to worry about yet. You might be, if there is, you might be on the early side of the mite cycle. Mm-hmm. But I don't. What do you guys think? I don't think it would hurt at all to take a wash on a nuke.
No, I don't think so.
No, and I can reference the program that I've been going through, the University of Florida program. They tell you in their program, check them every month.
Yeah,
it's just as simple as that. That way you're on top of it. So, yeah, I mean, 300 bees. If you think about a colony, it's probably more than that die in a day. So,
yeah, especially during this time of the year when they're building up.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I might get them in a big. If you put them in a regular size box, I'd probably give them a couple days to get established, and then I wouldn't hesitate at all to go ahead and do a wash and then address them as needed. Another question here. Let's see. This is a question some people probably run into, whether they have swarm cells or they just do some grafting. The weather is inclement. The virgin queens emerge or hatch out of their cells. What do you do with them? Greg, what do you do in that case if you have some virgins that you can't get in the hives?
No comment.
Okay.
No, I absolutely, virgins are the bane of my existence. Virgins have been I've had such bad luck with virgins that I just do everything in the world possible. Tony, though, his situation there is he harvested some swarm cells, which is extremely exciting. And he got him in the incubator due to weather, so he wasn't able to, I imagine, get them into mating nuke or get them into a split. So the best course of action is to get them hatched and then figure out. I'll tell you what I've tried, and then you guys can maybe tell me where I've went wrong. I've spit on them. I've tried to descent them with vanilla and sugar water. I've ran them in the front door. I've ran them through the top lid. I've put them into a cage with attendants. I've put them into a cage by themselves. I've let them go queenless for up to a week. I've tried to put the virgin in 2 to 4 days after I've pulled a queen. I've done it in all strengths of colonies from 2 frame up until 5 and 6 frames of bees. I have just not had the best of luck to the point to where I said, forget about it. If they hatch out and those will be the versions that I'll play with and I'll dabble with off to the side and see what happens. But I think right now I'm probably sitting at my batting average is probably, it's terrible. But there's guys who do it, and I've got a bunch of virgins coming from Corey, and so I'm going to do it Corey's way and see how those behave. And maybe it's one of those things where it's not you, it's me. Let's just say that it's not you, it's me. But I've had terrible luck. Brian, what about you?
I have never purchased until this year virgin queens. So I've never tried to introduce them. I have no experience, so I can't offer anything, I can't offer any advice for this.
Well, I have very little experience as well. I have walked some in before, and I know some of them have worked out. Just maybe if I have if I had cells that were a little bit too far along when I picked them up, an hour or 2 away, and they started emerging before I got to the colonies. And so I just kind of walk them in and see what happened. And I've had some success with that. Not a lot. I think I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think Mike Berry's walked a few in the past with success. But I also talked to Jason Crook up at Bohemia Bees, and he's had really good luck with virgins. He says he really likes to do it that way, but I am in the process now of introducing some of Corey's queens, utilizing I even called him before I did it to make sure I was doing it right. And I pretty much did it exactly how he said. So within about 10 days, we're going to know if it works, at least here. Plenty of drones in the area. I think the nukes were just about perfect when I went back in on Friday and looked at them. What I did was, Corey recommends you want them to be hopelessly queenless. So I pulled the splits. I pulled the splits on a Saturday. I got the virgin queens on a Tuesday and went up there and put them in the hives in the cages, but I taped over the candy plug so they wouldn't release them right away. And I went back, actually Friday, which was 6 days after I made the splits. He says he told me Friday or Saturday. So basically a week afterwards, I broke down any cells that were in the colonies. There were a few little queen cells that they had built, that they had made. And I just removed the tape. And so what that's going to do is it's going to allow those bees to release, chew through that candy and get to the new little queen, and then hopefully release her and get her mated. And so we're going to see how it works. One of them had actually, I didn't tape it very well. Like there was a crease in the tape where it opened up and the queen was out of the cage. I didn't see her in the hive. Have no idea if she was in there. I just have a hard time seeing virgin queens lots of times. And it was in the middle of the day. Maybe she was on a mating flight. I don't know. But the rest of them, we're just going to see what happens. And so I will have a video on that. I'm not going to do a video with each step. Just kind of do a video that talks about the whole introduction process. And then at the end, we'll have a number. And hopefully it'll work out good. I fed them when I made the splits. I put some more food on them when I put the queens in there. And now a flow is starting. And so we'll find out if it works, at least in my case. I think it will. Corey's real confident in it. That's how he does it. So we'll see. But as far as virgin queens from swarm cells, I personally, what do you have to lose if it just – if you don't have the cages or the way to introduce them, what do you have to lose? Just kind of letting them walk in? I don't know. It's something you got to play with and figure out. The way I look at it with beekeeping is, why not just try it and see what happens? If you only have a colony or two and you're doing that, it's a little more risky. But if you got enough colonies to break off a couple of splits and just try it and see what happens, I don't think there's any reason not to do that.
It's a swarm cell. You're not out anything, and it's not like
exactly.
you're depending on that for a certain
Mhm.
thing. If you've got something that you set aside and you're, hopelessly queenless, and
Just
maybe
why not try it? Yeah.
give it a shot.
Give it a
Maybe try
shot.
to get her into a JZBZ and put a candy plug on there and, try it like Bruce said with a piece of tape. See what happens.
Mhm.
All right. Here's just a real simple question. Brian, do you have an LLC for your honey cells or for your business? I do not. I'm a sole proprietor. Something I'm looking into. I probably need to do that pretty soon, but I've just done everything on a sole proprietorship. But I know a lot of people recommend the LLC. Brian, do you have an LLC?
I got mine last year.
Greg, I know you do, don't you? I know you've got
I would
LLC.
highly encourage folks, if you're even contemplating going down sole proprietor versus LLC, or maybe you're expanding quick and there's enough finances there to talk about an S corp, get a hold of your CPA and run the scenarios and let them guide you on which is a better fit for your tax liability.
Yeah, you need to talk to accountant, attorney, just see what's best for your situation. I'm just ripping through a couple more questions here really quick. Patrick Woods says, I'm having a high percentage of failed mated queens from splits and swarms. My bees have been swarming from March 9th until this past Friday, having to dump out drone laying queens in Charlotte, North Carolina. I personally have had a very similar experience this spring. I'll just be honest. I've dumped out more drone layers than I ever probably have in the past from a percentage perspective. And last year I made a lot of real early splits with cells and they did quite well. This year I did a lot of splits early with cells and they did not do nearly as well. The percentage was below 50% probably acceptance, I would say. Have some beautiful colonies and some beautiful queens out of it, but not a lot. It wasn't near what I had hoped. And so I think this year the weather got me. It was beautiful when we split. Everything looked really good. And then we had a lot of wet, rainy weather and a little bit of cold weather in there. And obviously, if those virgins are hanging out in the hives when they should be out on their mating flights, and if they get out in that nasty weather and get lost, or the drones aren't flying or whatever, then that can happen. And so I just thought that happened to me. Actually, I'm going through the exact same thing with my early splits this year. And I think next year I'm going to wait a little bit later, try to extend it out a little bit later to do my first splits. I think it's less risky that way. Greg, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you guys had a lot of high winds though too, a lot of storms and things that came through there. I think the high winds don't help anything too, on top of having rain. But whenever you get that 30, 35, 40 mile an hour winds and things like that, I mean, come on, that's if it's uncomfortable for you to be out there, imagine being a bee trying to go on her illustrious mating flight. I mean, that's going to be tough. So I think
Greg, I got a question for you, Greg, as far as mating flights go. And Brian, if you've got any ideas from your class, chime in here. But as far as mating flights go, I know that the virgin queens, I know that there's probably a certain time that they try and get out and get mated, and that can be extended a while, obviously. But is it one of these things to where once that queen flies the first time, does she have to complete those 2 or 3 mating flights right in succession, or can there be a little delay in there between the mating flights, or what do you think?
Here's the one. I think why so many of us are drawn to bees and then eventually queen rearing is there is so much there is so much magic left to everything. There is so much mystery. We think we know all these things. How many mating flights? How often? If you were to ask, let's take a poll. Before we do, let me thank. I don't have a way to comment, guys, tonight, or to pull up comments, but Corey Madison says thanks for the queens. Greg was able to release all 6 of them today with no issues. Queens look great and super fast shipping. Corey, I want to thank you for your support. We sent out some Georgia Italian hybrids, Italian Carney hybrids, out to Corey, and I'm glad you got them there. It was really cold, and they went next day air, and you're always a little worried. So glad to hear they went good. The thing about it is, let's take a little poll here, Bruce. How many, if you guys would, in the comments below, how long does a queen have to go on her mating flight? Let's see what the audience has to say here.
Okay, throw it in there. What are your thoughts as far as when does that queen have to be mated by? How many days?
it's pretty interesting because we're under the impression that there is a time frame that the queen has to be successfully mated. And of course, as you're looking at your queen rearing charts and when you're expected to see eggs and when you're expecting that grafted cell to be capped and then when you should move that into a nuke, when it's going to emerge, when the window that she should be going on her mating flight, when you should first start to see eggs, and then how long after before you really just say, okay, enough is enough. Let's replace this. This isn't working. Lot of great answers in here so far. Brian's laughing because he knows why I asked the question. But let's just go through. It looks like we've got Tim, Southwest Ohio, honeybee says 7 to 14 days. Dan Weaver, 2 weeks. Matt Kirkland, 2 weeks. Michelle Irwin, 2 weeks. Patrick Woods, 14 days. Ziggy's Bees, 21 days at most, I believe. We got old Grumpy Bill up to 10 days. Bruce Southern Sass, 3 weeks. Kenneth Bogg, 3 weeks. Mike Conley, 8 days. J.W. Irwin, looking forward to seeing you, J.W., I think the end of this month or so. He says 21 days. Robert Souther Jr., 2 to 3 weeks. Most importantly, John Lawler says, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Tootsie Pop? 1, 2, 3. Now, so what if I told you that we have documented and watched a queen go, ready? Drum roll, please. 5 weeks.
How many?
It took her 5 weeks. And we let her go on and on and on and on and on. And I don't know what the mechanism was. But we'll talk about that at a later time. But it took her 5 weeks. And then when she got mated and started laying it up. No, this is family friendly, guys. Oh man, I am absolutely wore out.
Yeah.
When she started laying it up, beautiful laying pattern, just a bricklayer. Come on, bro. Come on, fellas. Golly, get your mind out.
No.
Oh man. But anyways, look at Brian. Oh wow. Anyway,
okay. It's okay.
The average consensus is 10 days, is what you'll hear. But the fact of the matter is, we've seen it can be way longer, and sometimes there might be multiple flights.
Yeah, I always see. I was under the impression that she's a brick house. I was under the impression that that they went on multiple mating flights, like maybe got mated once per flight, but I guess they get mated multiple times per flight. And my thoughts are, from what I understand recently, I've learned a lot after talking to you guys, and Corey taught me a lot, and I'd always assumed 10 days to 2 weeks. So historically I thought, well, within 2 weeks of introducing a queen cell, if I put a ripe queen cell in a hive, we should see eggs. And I've noticed, especially with spring splits, that's not usually the case. Normally in 2 weeks, they're barely starting if they're laying at all. And so I've started waiting, 3 weeks, and then you start to see them usually. But I've learned that that they are capable of mating much longer, after a much longer period of time than I originally thought. I've had some that's been 4 weeks before they were laying in the hive, and so I agree with you there, Greg. And Corey actually talked to me about that a little bit. He's like, yeah, I think he said that he's seen it happen up to like 28 days. And so if you've gone 5 weeks, so really the bottom line is, I think most queens probably, in my opinion, get mated in 10 days to 2 weeks, but it can take longer for sure. So what we say, Greg, there are no
absolutes, are there, Bruce? I tell you what's interesting to think about. You brought it up. I know we're running late already. We're at about an hour and a half. We try not to go too long on these things. But what's interesting to think about is, we think we can see into a colony, and we think, okay, we have a ripe queen cell, right? And that the tip of that cell starts to thin out and darken up, and it looks like cardboard. It kind of gets that fibrous texture, right? And then you see a queen cell hatching within minutes. Usually you can watch them come out when it's with that far along. So we think, okay, we understand that. We can kind of see that timeline, and she comes out, we see what she looks like, and when they first come out, they're not super vibrant necessarily yet. They've got that kind of triangular shaped abdomen, and they're real skittery running around. They're flapping, they're running, just bobbing and weaving, doing their thing, right? They mature a little bit. They have a little bit more, a little bit better diet. They're tended to a little bit. They develop, they mature. But what is it that actually sets her off on her mating flight? Like I think what's interesting is we want to think that there's a certain point in the colony where it says, or she says, okay, now is the time I go on my mating flight. It's warm out. The temperatures are there. Is it the workers are coming back and saying, hey, there's a DCA up here. The weather's right. The flowers are going. Does she intrinsically know that today is the day that she goes out to do all of her thing? What's interesting is that scenario where we had the virgin that was a 5-week mating flight. She was in a very, very small split that just wasn't going anywhere. Okay. And so they had a very, very small force, not a lot of incoming nectar and pollen, just enough to keep that little tiny split alive. They were surviving, but they weren't thriving. And as soon as I removed that queen from that split, and what had happened is in the learning yard, we were having folks go through colonies to see, are they queen right? Are they okay? Are we looking for the queen or evidence of the queen? So we intentionally sabotaged one of the colonies and we pulled the queen out completely. And we got out to where there were no more day-old eggs in that colony. And then I introduced that virgin into that colony, right? What I thought was a virgin into that colony. And we go through and one of the folks was going through, and I was hoping they would find it. Just because you see a queen doesn't mean everything is okay. They found the queen, they found no eggs, and they picked up on that. It's okay, great. Here's a queen. It's a marked queen, but there are no eggs in here. What's going on inside the colony? Well, they didn't know that I intentionally sabotaged that. But the next time we got together at the next learning yard, I think it would have been 2 weeks later, laying up a storm. I mean, frames have gone to town. Well, why did she decide to start laying all of a sudden? She was very small, just a little dinky queen when I pulled her and placed her over there. But something happened when she got into that larger colony. That essence, that vibe of that larger colony had a lot more going on to it. They could either tend to her better. She developed she was a late bloomer because of that, or she waited until the conditions inside of that split or that colony could support and sustain brood. And then she went off and got mated and came back. To me, I think that is really cool because there is so much we don't know of the nuance, the trigger mechanism to say, okay, today's the day on this queen is going to go out. There's a lot more than just temperature, what day of the week and what time. There's a whole synergistic thing going on inside the colony that dictates when mama lifts off. And to me, I think that's pretty cool.
Tony, I appreciate the super chat here. It says, I've got graphs going. They come from one of my favorites, so I might try to save a few. Thanks, guys.
Nice.
It's kind of cool stuff. So that's just tremendous stuff, Greg. And I do think, we talk about the weather, but I think you made a good point. It's not just the weather. It's also the colony health, what the status is in the colony. And, certain times of the year, they can get away with more than they can other times of the year. I know some big queen breeders, I'm not sure how you do it up there, but I've seen some people just take a scoop of bees and put them in a mating nuke during the proper time of the year. And those jokers can get those queens mated and do well. Whereas in the early spring, when the temperatures are a little bit lower, when the weather conditions aren't quite right, they need to have maybe more resources, more bees, more food, and so forth to be able to be successful. And so many, as you say, nuance. There's so much nuance in this beekeeping thing, and different times of the year, different conditions. Man, it's just such a cool thing to try to figure out and to be a part of. Had one more comment or question here I wanted to address. J.W. Irwin says, any ideas on how to keep bees from drowning from frame feeders? I feel like I'm losing way too many. I've never really used frame feeders. I know, Greg, you use the bucket feeders primarily. Brian, have you used bucket feeders, or have you ever used frame feeders? What are your thoughts on that, guys?
I never have. I've always used, I have those top feeders. I've got the circular ones that, fit onto the inner covers. I've got some buckets now that I'm using. If there's any bees drowning, I mean, why not, put something in it? Do they have a ladder? Can you get, pine needles? Can you get something? Wine corks, just anything in there that is going to give them something to grip and be able to climb out. I mean, I would try anything really.
Yeah.
I think no matter
so.
what you do, every feeder has pros and cons. I've used frame feeders for years. I'm a big fan of the mother load frame feeder. We don't use them all year round, and they're not for every feeding circumstance. Just like bucket feeders, there's nuance to all those. Where the difference is what the bees do with it, I think how they perceive those carbohydrates. When you put something like a frame feeder in, the worst, well, I should gotta be careful. The most notorious for drowning are the hive top feeders. Even the ones with the 1/8 inch, even with the hardware cloth, those, as Bruce would say, those jokers would just find a way in there and drown. There's a lot of dead bees, it seems like, in those. Frame feeders typically have less dead bees, whether it's the man lake with the insert ladders or like the mother loads. There are the perforated ladders for them to get in and out, but there are times a year where it's almost as though there's just a rush to the feed, and they pile up, they get trampled in there, they don't come out. I don't know if I'm gonna probably be ignorant here, and that's okay, but sometimes I don't wonder if you just have older bees that are maybe feeding, dying off. I don't know that the old bees that are still inside the colony, what their feeding apparatus really still is. If they are feeding themselves or on their own, is it possible that some of the mortality that we see with the bees or just the old bees getting that last bit of feed, and they're when they do get in there, they're not strong enough to get out? Because I've seen it. If you happen to get a bee in your bucket when you're filling it up, or in a feeder, those dudes those ladies will sink, right? But then they'll float up to the top of the syrup, even with Pro Sweep. They'll roll over and they'll find a way to get out of that syrup. So a lot of times they can get out of there. When they don't, I think that's a different story. But I think to keep in mind is when you're using something like a top feeder or a frame feeder, it's more, in my mind, is that gorging storage approach that the bees are taking with the feed. Whereas a bucket feeder is that, in my mind, is more of that trickle, steady pace feed on top. A bucket feeder can drown bees too, especially if you're using it when it's too cold out and it loses vacuum. If you don't get your seal back on there right, you could definitely have syrup hit bees, no matter which feeder that it is. It's just knowing the limitations for each one, but more importantly, knowing, okay, here's what a hive top feeder does. Here's what a frame feeder does. Here's what a bucket feeder does. What are my goals with feeding? What am I trying to accomplish? And then tuning that up, because 90% of the year we're using bucket feeders. Early in the year, we're making very early splits, and we're getting nights down into the 30s and days where it's in the 50s and 60s. That's where I lean on the frame feeders, because I don't want a bucket on top of my colonies with nighttime temps in the 30s. So no matter how nice the feeder is, the fact of the matter is, if it's an open vessel for fluid, bees are going to drown in it one way or the other, it seems.
There'll be some, yeah. Yeah, I was my first experience really utilizing the frame feeders was over when I went to spend that day with Seth Hill over in South Georgia a few weeks back, and that's pretty much what they use. He kind of just rotated those boxes forward and filled them up as he went along, and it's interesting because I think he actually told me be sure to fill them all the way up and even overflowing a little bit, because any bees that are down in there, it'll kind of wash them up and out. If that makes sense. And if the bees are, what I've noticed about bees is if they're in water or if they're in sugar syrup, if they have something they can grab a hold of and climb out of that, they do pretty well. But if they get stuck in the middle of something like that, they'll drown and it can kill them. And so that's why it's important to have a ladder. It's important to have something to grab a hold of, and they'll usually end up doing okay. But yeah, you do lose some. You have a little bit of attrition with most any of these kind of feeders. I think some are better than others, but it's something to be expected. You just don't want to have the whole feeder filled up and piled up with dead bees from drowning, and then they can't even get to the syrup because there's so many. I'm not sure. You don't want that to happen, but there's going to be a little bit of attrition. Like Brian said earlier, how many bees die each day in a colony? I mean, during the peak time, there could be 1,000 or more bees dying every day just from getting out from old age as they begin to age out. And so we don't have any idea. I mean, of both the birth and the attrition that happens. It's hard to conceive how many bees are emerging and how many bees are dying every day. It's just almost inconceivable because you really don't see them. You know, I guess they fly off to die, so you don't see them much around the hives, but there's always that turnover continuously, especially during the peak times when the bees are really busy in the spring and summer. And, you know, obviously those numbers vary. In the spring, there's more building up than dying, and it just kind of goes back and forth in the fall and spring. But during the peak times, man, it's just a big turnover every single day. Awesome. Well, guys, it is, we've been in this thing for an hour and a half or more, and we have more people watching now than we have the rest of the chat, I think. So it's crazy how that works. We talk every time about, maybe cutting it back to an hour and a half. And we just really appreciate everyone being on here. It just seems like 2 hours is a long time, but we have such a good bunch of folks on here, and so many people that I've had the privilege of meeting personally and through these chats. And so we appreciate everyone for coming on here. Is there anything else? Maybe we could start to wrap it up a little bit. Brian, why don't we start with you? Any final thoughts for us tonight? Anything you'd like to say to kind of wrap this thing up? Any thoughts you have here?
No, I don't, gosh, you know, me on the final thoughts, I always just defer over to this character over here, you know, but, I'll just say though, I know, like, video wise in the last, I'd say probably month, I've been kind of slacking, but that's just because the weather has just been so awful. But I probably will be getting to the point, like once our weather really hits, I guaranteed I'm going to have a video a week, and there might be some weeks where I'll have 2. So it's going to get very busy, and just, you know, I appreciate everybody just kind of hanging tight and just bearing with me through this little, like, dry spell, so to say, of videos. But you know, I'll have them coming. So a lot of work. I mean, I just coming up here, I know as soon as the weather breaks, I know we've got some days of 70s coming up, and you know, I'll be checking all my colonies just to make sure that queens were released, and getting, you know, I'll probably do some initial washes here, you know, of the year, just to see where I'm at. Our weather's been so lousy, I haven't even been able to check my mite counts, but it's going to get interesting real soon. So, you know, we'll see. So be in videos though. So look for videos, definitely.
Yeah, Brian, you're doing a great job up there with those videos, man. I'm enjoying the editing, and it's just kind of fun watching your journey up there, man. Your growth, and you're walking everybody through, and
well,
just appreciate you sharing those with us.
No more growth.
We'll see about that.
Well, let me put it this way: you're showing the growth, and then you're showing how you're going to grow into those new colonies as well, as far as like mature and keep them alive, hopefully, and just what the management process, because you have grown. And this year is your year of growth, and so you're showing what you're doing, and that's what I appreciate.
Yeah.
Gosh, thanks JW and Brian for the super chats, man, and for the super stickers. That means so much to me and to all of us. We really appreciate that. Greg, what do you have for us, man? Some thoughts here.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for spending some time with us tonight here on the Stream Team Beekeeping Chat. All the folks who have supported all of our individual channels, us as a collective. And then also all the folks who are supporting Nature's Image Farm, from my wife and all 7 kids. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts. You guys make this thing possible for us. One thing I want to share is I posted just a quick little story clip of it. But anyone who's in business for themselves, but specifically the bee business, I mean, it is rough. It is tough. It's not easy. Like many of you, there are days and there are nights without sleep. There's worry. Fear tries to creep in. You're just worried about how you're going to make the next move happen. How are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? And those things are just are there to seek, kill, and destroy all the joy and the happiness in your mission on Earth. And as our last package customers were leaving this past weekend, There's as you can imagine, that's an enormous undertaking. After that many trips of bringing packages up for folks, it's a huge financial liability. A lot of folks are entrusting their futures of their apiaries into your hands, and they are financially compensating you to do it. It's a massive undertaking, and not one that we take lightly. And it's as we're wrapping that up, and you get that put behind you, there's a sense of relief, but there's still so much of the season left, and there's still so many things in the works. And when you're exhausted and you're tired and you just feel like you can't go on any further, Susan and I were out there just reflecting on that, and we're looking over the learning yard, and the most beautiful, God gave us the most beautiful rainbow, not one, but two, a double rainbow over the backside of the farm. And it was beautiful because it's a promise. We all know what the rainbow signifies in the Bible, that God won't destroy this creation like he had in the past. For me, it's also a reminder that God put on my heart that he never said this was going to be easy, but he did promise he'd be there with us every step of the way. And that's important. So I want to remind you, as you're growing your apiary, as you're growing your business, hey, we all have those moments where doubt and fear creep in that wants to rob and steal and kill our joy and our happiness. But just know we're all right here, right alongside with you too. We want to see you do well. But more importantly, just trust that God has a plan for you and what you're doing, and put one step right in front of the other, and just keep heading in that direction. And when God gives you the rainbow and shows you that signs, accept it, appreciate it, and just know that there is a plan, and just do what you can to keep walking through those doors that he opens. That being said, we're looking forward to another week here on the farm where things are just growing and blooming and booming. And a lot of folks are coming through the shop doors every week, every weekend. This coming Saturday, May the 6th, another learning yard where we're going to get in, check in on the packages that we installed this past weekend, make sure the queens are out, make sure that they're laying well. We're going to go ahead and administer the first shots of oxalic acid using our favorite tool, the instant vape, to kind of do that. We're going to show folks, walk folks right through that entire process, what colonies should look like after you've installed a package. How do you know they're looking right? What should you be looking for? What to keep an eye on? What to plan for? How to treat them for mites? How to keep these colonies looking good and growing and off to a good start? That's what we're going to be focused on this Saturday at the learning yard here at Nature's Image Farm. I'm looking forward to a bunch more learning yards this year. We're going to see folks like Brian there. We're going to get Bruce up there. It's going to be a lot of fun. I could go on all night long, and I would love to. But I just want to let you guys know how much we appreciate you. We can't thank you enough. And Bruce, what about you? What's going on for this coming week?
Yeah, just real quick before I move on, and I appreciate those comments. I echo those sentiments, Greg and Brian both. I did send Jason from Bohemia Bees has been on me for a while to send him some almond honey. This year we didn't have hardly any, but I did scoop some out. I'm pretty sure it was almond honey. And this is how he describes it for those who might be curious. Definitely, let's see. He says it's definitely a distinct taste. It almost tastes like a nutty maple syrup with a tart aftertaste. That's probably the best description I've ever heard. I don't like it at all. It doesn't taste good to me, but it is exactly like that. At first, it kind of tastes that little nutty flavor, and then it just hits you with a really tart, strong aftertaste. So I thought I'd share that with you guys in case you wondered.
Interesting.
I can't be sending people almond honey because I don't know if I'm going to have any more in the future, and it's just not something I really want to do. But in Jason's case, he really wanted to try it, and so I sent him I only could get about a third of a bottle. I really could. There wasn't much food on the colonies at all, but I did buy some.
Since you sent some almond honey, I think Jason needs to send some of that lantern fly.
That stuff is actually really good.
I know.
Holy cow!
And that's why I'm saying that.
Is that kind of like a dewberry type or like a
honeydew?
Honeydew type honey? Is that kind of what it is? A similar thing?
What?
It's good. It's so good. The kid destroyed every honey straw that Dr. Robin Underwood gave me to try, and I was going to do a video. I laid those honey straws on the table at our booth at the West Virginia conference, and Robin's like, "Hey, have you tried this?" And I said, "What?" She goes, "I got the spotter and lanternfly honey." I said, "What?" She goes, "Here, try one." And so I chewed it, and I started. She goes, "Oh, you actually like it?" I said, "This is amazing."
Yeah.
That's
Took it back to the
interesting.
kids. The kids destroyed it. I said, "Hey guys, did you guys see those honey straws?" They're like, "What honey straws?" No, we ate them all.
Yeah.
Like, holy cow! They devoured it.
Didn't,
They didn't grow any
didn't,
third eyes or anything weird or funky, So
didn't someone have it though at the BBQ last year?
oh, I don't know. I know we had lanternflies at the back of Jason's place
Right,
there.
right.
I don't know if there was any honey or not.
I
Was
thought
there?
someone had a sampling of it, but that's another
Anyway.
day. But yeah,
But kind of getting back on the, I just like to say, Greg and Brian both echo the sentiments, and Greg especially, the sentiment about the rainbow and just some of the miracles you see out in the bee yard with the bees and just out in nature, the things you experience, even if it's not related to the bees, the rainbows, the beautiful sunsets, the opportunity to hear the birds chirping and just being involved with the whole situation out there. It is so therapeutic to me to be out there doing that. Some days I'm exhausted. I don't want to do it. And I'm dreading going out there. And then once I get out there, I almost always just really enjoy it. And I can think of a couple of instances where I've just been out there during, late in an evening with the sunset off in the distance and just the peace that comes along with being out there, whether you're doing bees or just outside, during certain times of the day in certain situations, it's just perfect. One of my favorite, I think I did a short a while back with me. I was out in Hartford out in the middle of nowhere, and it was just a beautiful sunset off in the horizon. I put my smoker up on the beehive. It was just smoking and just off in it was such a beautiful scene, and just out there, nobody else is around. And it's just you're close to, it's a divine thing. I mean, I talk about how there's a divine nature to bees, and just the whole thing is just, to me, it's just amazing. Greg, like you asked that question, what is it about those bugs in a box, man? And that's exactly what it is. What is it? I really don't know, but there is something very special about it, and I really enjoy it. So we appreciate everyone coming on tonight, guys. We have really enjoyed doing this stream team thing, and to be frank, every week I'm a little tired. I'm like, but then once we get on this thing and we start talking and the chemistry, the friendship we've developed between the three of us, and the relationship we developed with so many of the folks on the chat here, got new people coming in all the time, and those who keep visiting us week after week after week. It's just a community that we can't say enough good things about. We really appreciate you being here. So Greg, I'm going to let you bring it on home with your statement and your quote. That's one of the best things on here. Go ahead and bring it home for us, Greg.
Well, you mentioned the bugs in the box there, and what is it about those bugs in the box? I'm not sure that we'll ever truly know, but I know that we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to find out. I'm looking forward to that for sure. But as always, I want to remind folks to be the lighthouse and to be the change that you want to see in this world. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.